world's great novels. We present the first of a four-part adaptation of The Rise of Silas Lapham by William Dean Howells. Another in our series of books that live the world's great novels.
The Rise of Silas Lapham by William Dean Howells appeared in 1885, and its immediate popularity was surpassed only by its influence on future American writers. For here was no sentimental romance in the fashion of the day, but a realistic account of the life of a self-made businessman. The story of the rise of Silas Lapham. Boston, 1875. Heavy dray carts rumbled over the worn cobblestones of Republic Street, lined with factories, warehouses, and offices. At the Lapham Mineral Paint Company, a heavy-set man behind a massive desk puffed at a cigar and talked with a young newspaper reporter.
As I explained in my note, Mr. Lapham, the Boston Events is running a series called The Solid Men of Boston. And I'm here to interview you as one of our business and industrial leaders.
Well, sir, I was born in Vermont. Must be, let me see, that was 1820. This is 1875. Must be 55 years ago. Grew up on a farm there near the Canada line.
Your parents were poor, of course. You didn't have any of the advantages.
Yeah, not if you mean school and all like that, but it counts for something to have folks like mine, I guess. My father wasn't afraid of work, I'll tell you. My mother, just a little bit of a thing she was, well, she looked after 6 growing boys, cooking, washing, ironing, mending every minute.
She sounds like a wonderfully good woman.
Yes, sir, she was.
You discovered your paint mine right there on the family farm, didn't you?
It was my father that rightly discovered it, a mine of paint ore. Paint mine, we called it.
But you were the founder of the business, weren't you?
Yes, but that come later. He was a regular crank about that paint, but he didn't know how to make a go of it. After a time, the older boys cleared out and went west, but I hung on to the old farm.
In some intuitive way, you probably sensed the possibilities of that paint mine.
No, it was just that the old house was there. Later on, the graves. Of course, it turned out to be a good thing I held on to it. The paint works are still up there now. It's a little place that used to be called Lumberville, but after I gave them a new town hall a few years back, they changed it to Lapham Village. Those paint works ain't been shut down. The fires ain't been out since we started. We still keep up the old house there. My wife and the girls kind of like it. Hey, maybe this'll interest you. A picture of us all together. It was took there last summer.
Well, a regular family portrait. And say, who's the regular beauty?
That's our youngest daughter, Irene. Just as practical as she is pretty, too. Here's my oldest, Penelope. Not so pretty some ways, but she is smart. Can read any book that comes along. I don't care what it is.
And this, of course, is Mrs. Lapham.
Yes, that's my wife. Persis, her name is. And there just wouldn't have been any Lapham Paint Company except for her. You see, we ran the hotel there in Lumberville, that's Lapham Village now, after we was married. She'd been a school teacher before, and she was always after me to paint up. But finally, I thought of that paint mine and went and brought back some of the stuff. Mixed it myself, tried it out on the back of the hotel. As soon as I got the first coat on, she says right off, Silas, you ain't got a paint mine, you got a gold mine.
And that's just the way it turned out, isn't it? Of course, it took your ambition and business sense to make it what it is.
Well, I guess I ain't done bad with it, but I admit I had a mighty good thing to start with. My paint can stand fire, water, and acid. Won't crack, nor fade, nor scale. You can paint a steam boiler, a cistern, or a brick wall with it, and it's the best thing you can do for any of them.
You really believe in your paint, don't you?
Yes, sir, young man, I do. Now, when I seen I had a good thing, I put everything I could scrape together behind the paint. And Mrs. Lapham was with me every time. Why, when I went to war, she just about took over and managed things.
Oh, you saw service in the war? I suppose I should have known that.
Well, I'm not one to talk about it much, but you can call me Colonel if you want to. I got a rifle ball in my leg at Gettysburg. Well, when I come back and took over, business got going pretty good, but while I'd been away, times had changed. The day of little things was over, everything big and getting bigger. My wife got after me to take a partner and get some capital and expand. Well, I didn't like the idea of anyone else mixed in my paint, but I finally did it.
I always thought that this was a one-man firm, Colonel Lapham.
It is now. This fella had money enough, but he just didn't know nothing about paint. We hung together a year or two, then he took back his money, and I took back my paint. Since then, I've gone it alone, for better or worse.
It's been for the better, all right, or I wouldn't be interviewing you as one of the solid men of Boston.
I almost forgotten about that, talking along here. All right, it's time to close up and go.
I'm sorry I've taken so much of your time, but I'm sure I have all the information I need. I'll be getting back to the office.
Wait a minute. Hold on there. My horse is right outside. I'll drop you off on my way home.
At home, in their comfortable, unfashionable house in the south end of Boston, Persis Lapham sat waiting for Silas. She'd received a letter, an unexpected letter, and she spoke of it as soon as he arrived.
Silas, do you remember the Coreys, those folks Irene and I met on our vacation last summer?
Yeah, sure. Them high-toned folks that live on the hill. Did they call on you again?
No, but I got a circular from Mrs. Corey asking for a donation for a charity.
Donation, huh? Well, I guess I better give you a check.
They were awful nice to Irene and me. Of course, that was after Mrs. Corey took sick all of a sudden, and I nursed her for a spell.
Yeah.
But I never knew anybody to be so grateful.
This don't seem like much of a way to return a favor, but here you are.
But, Silas, this check is for $500.
About it, Bert. Is that plenty?
Oh.
Now, what did you do that for? Tear up the check.
I'll take a check for $100, Silas. That's enough, and I don't want to show off before them.
Oh? I thought maybe you did. After all, they're pretty high society.
I don't believe they ever mentioned it to me, Silas. What kind of business is Mr. Corey in? Do you know of him?
Yes, I know of him. I guess he ain't in nothing. But his father was. Made a lot of money, too. So I guess Bromfield Corey ain't never had to work, nor wanted to. Paints pictures or some such thing, I've heard, but never heard of him selling any of them.
Well, I just wish you'd been there with us, Silas. You'd have had to agree that they were just as nice a people as you ever met. Mrs. Corey, the girls, and the young man, all of them. But they didn't seem the least stuck up.
They had no call to be with you. I could buy and sell Bromfield Corey twice over.
Now, that isn't everything there is, Silas.
I expect that young man of theirs was stuck on Irene, wasn't he? No matter who they are, he ain't seen anybody prettier than her.
Well, he was awful attentive, but I don't know as he meant anything by it.
Seems funny to me, as friendly as they are, that they never called on you again.
Oh, it's not so funny, I guess. After all, this neighborhood is sort of out of the way.
Out of the way of what?
Well, naturally, most of their friends live on the hill or the back bay, that's all. Why, they said they almost got lost that time they did come. This part of town was so unfamiliar to them.
Well, that's fair enough. We're not very familiar with the hill or the back bay either.
No, but we do know where they are, though.
I know where they are, all right. It just so happens I have a plot of land on the back bay.
You do, Silas? On the back bay? You never said anything.
Oh, I just picked it up in a sort of a trade. Was saving it as sort of a surprise, I guess. Would you like me to build a house on it?
Oh, I guess we can get along here for a while.
Even if the Coreys can't find their way here?
We've been happy enough here these 12 years, Silas. It was just that, well, I suppose we ought to do the best we can for the children.
I suppose we always had.
Yes, we have, according to our light.
Now, just what does that mean? Do you have some new light?
Oh, I don't know exactly, but if the girls are going to keep on living in Boston and marry here, I presume we ought to try to get them into society or something.
Well, whatever you want to do, go ahead. There's money enough.
Oh, it's not just that. I guess we've lived too much to ourselves, Silas. We ought to have gone out more, invited people to the house.
I've got no objections. Why don't you do it now?
I guess maybe I would, but somehow there doesn't seem to be anybody to ask. When Pen grew up, she didn't seem much to care for society, and I didn't give much mind to it. But now with Irene, with her looks and all, she ought to have every chance. Maybe we are in the wrong neighborhood.
Then we ain't going to be for long. There ain't a prettier lot in the Back Bay than mine, so let's build on it.
Oh, no, Silas. Oh, I don't know. I never dreamed of the Back Bay. I guess we'd better be satisfied where we are.
I ain't satisfied if we can do better.
Well, it's your land and your money, so I'm not going to say. But I won't have you build on it for me. That's all.
That's why I'd like to build there, for you, Pert, and for the girls. Say, come to think of it, maybe we'd ought to find out how they feel. They might have something to say about this.
Do you think Papa's really going to build on the Back Bay, Pen?
Well, when the Colonel gets an idea, he usually goes through with it. Besides, he wants us to have every advantage.
But I don't know if I'll like it there.
Why, of course you will, Irene. Surely you want to have every advantage. That really means it'll help us get married.
Oh, Pen, don't be silly.
Well, I guess they're beginning to worry about me. And the house on the Back Bay will be a good advertisement of us.
Oh, but we have been so happy here, Pen. I wouldn't want it ever to be any different.
Oh, but it's so unfashionable here. Why, the Coreys could hardly find their way, remember? Of course, that may have been partly because they were looking down their noses.
Oh, well, now, don't say things like that, Pen. They're just as nice as can be, and you haven't even met them yet.
Oh, but I'm sure I will when I live on the Back Bay. All of Boston society will flock to our house.
Oh, it will be kind of nice. The view and all.
Well, I hope Mr. Tom Corey will like the view when he gets back from his trip to Texas. I'm sure he will if you're in it.
Oh, don't be such a tease. Would you rather stay here, Pen? Maybe it would be better to stay as we are.
Oh, no, I'm all for the Back Bay. I don't see any use in having money and not enjoying it. That's what it's for. Although you'd hardly think so sometimes.
In the old aristocratic section of Boston, known as the Hills, stood the house of the Coreys, graceful with the dignity of age. The man in the brown velvet coat who sat at ease in the library of the house blended perfectly with the furnishing. Handsome, elegant, a little faded with the years. Bromfield Corey glanced up, then brushed the pince-nez from his eyes as his son Tom entered the room.
I hope I'm not disturbing your reading, sir.
Oh, no, I'm glad you stopped in, Tom. I've hardly seen you since you returned from Texas. I suppose you'll be going to Bar Harbor to stay the summer with your mother. But I hope you won't hurry away.
I did plan to go there, of course, but I hope I won't have much time for Bar Harbor this summer. Now that nothing came of the Texas trip, I hope I can find some other prospects.
Prospects? I'm not sure I know what you mean.
Well, it's just that I'm a little ashamed to come back and live upon you, sir.
Oh. Well, I suppose that is commendable.
As a matter of fact, I am going to see Mr. Seymour, the architect, you know, and talk over that line. Of course, I don't know what will come of it.
With the coming of summer, Silas showed that he had made up his mind about the lot on the Back Bay. An architect was consulted, the ground was broken, and work began on a house of magnificent proportions. Silas visited the site more and more often, coaxing his wife to go with him whenever he could.
My goodness, Silas. Do you have to pass everything on the road? You'll be the death of us yet, racing the way you do.
I guess I ain't too old to handle a horse yet, Bert. Well, there she is, our land. Looking out right over the water.
It is a pretty place, Silas, I declare. Just imagine us living on the Back Bay. I presume you'll have to give up driving and get a coachman.
Whoa there, whoa. Oh, I guess the man can drive his own rig on Beacon Street as well as anywhere. I don't aim to change none. Come on. Let's get out and take a look. Here, let me help you down. There you are.
Oh, look, Silas, there, watching the workers. Isn't that Mr.
Yes. Let's go back.
No, he's seen us. We can't. Why, hello, Mr. Rogers. It's a surprise to see you here.
How do you do, Mrs. Lapham? How are you, Mr. Lapham?
Quite well, thanks.
Why, we didn't know you were in Boston, Mr. Rogers. Is Mrs. Rogers with you?
No, Mrs. Rogers is still in Chicago.
Oh, I suppose you're well settled there now.
No, we have left Chicago. Mrs. Rogers remained only to finish up the packing.
You're leaving Chicago? Do you plan to come back to Boston?
I can't say as to that. We are thinking some of doing so.
Oh, I see. We're building a house.
So I was told. That's why I strolled by for a look.
Well, if you do come to Boston, I hope I shall see Mrs. Rogers.
I'm sure she would be happy to have you call. Now I must be going. Goodbye, Mrs. Lapham.
Goodbye.
Good day, sir.
Good day.
Silas, you left it all to me. You didn't say a word.
I had nothing to say to him.
You could have made things easier. Oh, why does he always have to appear just when everything seems to be all right? It just takes the joy out of everything for me to
Why
see him.
do you let it bother you? There ain't no reason for it.
I just can't help it. I can't look at him ever without feeling as if you'd ruined him.
Well, don't look at him then. You can remember, too, that it wasn't none of my idea to take on a partner.
But if you hadn't taken him in, if he hadn't put in his money when he did, the business would have gone under. You know that.
All right, maybe so. But he got his money out and more, too. You know that.
But he didn't want to take his money out. You forced him to.
He warn't of no use to me, not to the business. So I gave him his money and more and got rid of him, that's all.
Yes, and you got rid of him just when you knew your paint was going to be worth twice what it had been before.
That's business, ain't it? And I'll manage my business without your help.
You were glad of my help once, Silas.
Well, I'm tired of it now. Don't meddle, Persis.
I can't help it, Silas. It's the only thing I've ever known you to do that I'm ashamed of, that you should be ashamed of.
We'd best get on home, Persis. Come on, get in. Maybe we'll feel more like looking at the house another day.
Don't ask me to look at that house again. You can sell it for all of me. There's other people's ruin in it.
Get up.
But even her hurt and anger faded in the presence of his growing eagerness. Or perhaps she forgot her own feelings and thoughts of her daughters. As time passed and the house took form, the whole family would go to see it. Silas in the lead, pointing out each new development.
Well, she's starting to look like something now.
Oh, it is going to be nice, isn't it?
This will be your room right here. How do you think you like it?
It's
Lovely,
beautiful.
Colonel. You can see the boats in the bay, and the sunsets will be beautiful.
That's our room over there, Pert. Can you recognize it from the plans?
I could recognize it better if the walls were up and it was tidied up a bit. But it will be nice, Silas. A little different from our first house in Lumberville.
Hey, there's the architect fella coming, and there's somebody with him. We're over here, Mr. Seymour.
Well, how do you do? I see the whole family's here.
How do you do?
I hope you don't mind that I brought a friend along.
Oh, Mr. Corey. Well, Mr. Corey, what are you doing here?
Hello, Miss Lapham. It's nice to see you again.
Thank you.
And Mrs. Lapham, how are you?
Just fine, Mr. Corey. It is a surprise to see you here. Your mother said you were in Texas.
Oh, I got back not long ago. My friend Seymour here told me he was building a house for you, so I came over along with you.
Oh, I'm glad you did. How was your trip? Why, you look sunburned.
That's about all I have to show for my trip, I'm afraid.
It must have been terribly thrilling and adventurous. Don't you think so, Pen? Oh, I'm sorry. This is my sister Penelope. Mr. Corey?
How do you do?
And Papa, this is Mr. Corey.
How do you do, young man?
I'm glad to meet you, sir.
How's your mother, Mr. Corey? And your sisters? All well, I hope?
They're quite well, thank you.
They must be glad to have you back home again.
I suppose they would be, but only Father and I are home now. The others have gone to Bar Harbor for the summer.
Oh, yes. We'll be going to Nantasket soon. We go there every summer. We're late this year because of the house.
Building a house must be very exciting for you and your sister.
Oh, it is. Isn't it, Ben?
Oh, yes. Yes, it certainly is.
I'm sure it's going to be beautiful. The view will be magnificent.
Yes, I think it's an attractive bit of property. I always did like the water side of Beacon Street. When I decided to build, I wanted to build right. I think I got the best architect in Boston, in Seymour there.
Quite. Thank you, sir.
And if money will do the job, we'll do it. I started out to build a $40,000 house. We're into it now for $60,000, and I doubt if I get out of it for much less than $100,000.
It does seem to take a lot of money, all right, I'll admit. But I'm glad to say that Colonel Lapham seems to understand how it is.
Well, I can't have a nice house for nothing. I can understand that.
Silas, I think we'd better be going along. I guess we've gotten everybody's road out here enough for one day.
I'm glad we came out, though. We'd have missed our first caller to our new house.
Well, it's an honor. And I suppose I've seen more of your house than I ever will again.
Well, I hope not, young man. There'll be several chances to see us in the old one yet before we leave. Well, so that's young Corey, is it? He's got a good fair and square look to him. I'll say that for him.
Oh, Papa, did you have to practically force him to say he'll call at our house?
I was just trying to be friendly. It seemed to me like you'd mind seeing him either. I can't understand how a young fellow like that can hang around home and let his father support him.
I suppose that he was down in Texas looking after something.
He's come back without finding it, I reckon.
Well, if his father doesn't complain, I don't see why we should. Besides, we don't know what plans he has.
Well, I don't have a thing against him as far as that goes. I'll bet if I had him in business with me, I could make a man out of him yet.
Sometimes I believe you have mineral paint on the brain, Silas. Why, a person brought up like young Corey wouldn't think of touching mineral paint with a 10-foot pole.
Oh, they wouldn't they? I'd like to know why not.
Well, if you don't know already, there's no use trying to tell you.
Did you like him, Jane? Didn't you think he was nice?
He seemed very presentable and quite well dressed.
Oh, dear. I wonder what he thought of Papa's bragging. I did want Mr. Corey to like him, to like all of us.
Well, I'm sure he liked me. I was so witty. Building a house must be very exciting, he said. And then I said, oh, yes, it certainly is. You needn't worry but that I made an impression.
Oh, no, Ben, you're very charming. Oh, but Papa, was dreadful.
Oh, I liked hearing the Colonel go on myself.
I always did like the water side of Beacon Street myself.
It was awful. Oh, but don't you think he did look handsome?
Who, the Colonel?
You know very well I didn't mean Papa.
Oh, Mr. Corey. Why didn't you say Mr. Corey?
Well,
it's easy to say. Mr. Corey, Mr. Corey, Mr. Corey. See, it's not hard.
Please, Pen, I'll hear you all over the house.
Well, of course, maybe you prefer the sound of Mrs. Corey. Mrs. Corey. Now, how does that sound?
Why, you're just being mean. I'll never speak to you again, never.
Well, I will say that he did seem very glad to see you.
Do you think so? Really, Pen?
That evening in the house on the hill, young Tom Corey and his father settled down in the library after dinner.
Yes, I've been thinking over your situation, Tom. I've been trying to be practical for a change. Now, as I see it, there are stocks and bonds. There's real estate. There's even politics, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Or, have you ever thought of matrimony?
Oh, not quite in that way, sir. I mean as a career.
Oh, I wouldn't recommend that. But I don't see why, when it comes to falling in love, a man shouldn't fall in love with a rich girl as easily as a poor one.
I've always tried to be a dutiful son, sir. And you think you'd like to have a rich daughter-in-law, is that right?
I'd like for her to have other qualities. A little youth, a little beauty, a little charm.
Yes.
But those things go as often with money as without it. And I suppose I would like her people to be rather grammatical. Oh, I don't get about much, but your mother's told me about those benefactors of hers whom we met last summer, for instance, those mineral paint people. I understand they were rich, but passably grammatical.
The father isn't, I'm afraid.
Oh, what a pity. I believe you said before that the girl is quite pretty?
Oh, yes, sir, a real beauty, I'd say. In fact, there are two of them.
Both beautiful?
No, the other's not so pretty, but rather interesting, I'd judge.
Ah.
Although I don't believe she said more than a word today. Mr. Lapham did most of the talking.
That must have been a treat.
Truthfully, I enjoyed it. In fact, I rather liked him. Bluff, direct, honest, I'd say. You see, it's occurred to me that there's nothing to be ashamed of in mineral paint. Why, these days, all kinds of people go into all kinds of things.
Oh, I see. So that's what you're leading up to. Well, I don't suppose there's any real objection. Of course, I might wish otherwise, but if you're interested in mineral paint, well, there's nothing ignoble about it. Perhaps we should invite Mr. Lapham to dinner. Talk it over.
Oh, I don't think that would be a good start, sir. I don't believe he'd consider it businesslike.
No, I don't see why he should be so punctilious if we're not.
Well, perhaps he shouldn't be, but he's not the one making the advances.
Well, you may be right. I'm sure I wouldn't know about such things.
No, I think I'll simply walk down to his office and let him see what he can do for me, if anything.
Well, come in, Mr. Corey. Sit down.
Thank you. Do you have a few minutes to give me?
Why, of course. Let's see. Yeah, I've got 20 minutes. Then I have to go and catch the boat for Nantasket. The family's down there, you know.
Well, I'll be brief and to the point. I want you to take me into the mineral paint business.
You what?
I want you to take me into the mineral paint business, Mr. Lapham.
Well, I don't know just how I could take you on.
You see, I have an idea of making myself useful to you. An idea I got from one of your own circulars.
You've seen my circulars, young man?
Oh, yes. In fact, I have done a good deal of investigating. I see that you're introducing your paint in foreign markets. Now, that's where I thought I might accomplish something for you and for myself, too.
Yeah?
You see, I know 2 or 3 languages pretty well. French, German, and a fair smattering of Spanish.
You mean you can talk them languages?
Yes, but it's not just that. You see, I know those countries where you want your paint introduced. I believe I could go to them and do a good job for you.
Well, that's an idea, but it's placing itself now as fast as there's any call for it. I don't see how we could pay a man's salary and expenses.
Oh, perhaps not, but that's not what I propose. I want to work for a commission.
For just a commission?
I told you I'd done some investigating. I've got confidence in your paint and in your business. I believe in it. I'm confident that it's the best paint on the market.
Well, now, when you talk that way, I'll admit your idea sounds interesting. But it'll take some talking over. Say, I'll tell you what. I'm a man who likes to get things over. Why don't you come down to Nantasket with me on the boat? That way we'll have plenty of time to talk.
Well, I wouldn't want to disturb your family.
Oh, no trouble at all. Best place in the world for us to talk. My wife takes considerable interest in the paint business. I'd enjoy having her hear your ideas, Mr. Corey.
The Rise of Silas Lapham by William Dean Howells is one of the world's great novels brought to you each week by the NBC University of the Air. Listen next week to the second episode of The Rise of Silas Lapham. And remember that your local public library can be a constant source of entertainment and information. To add to your enjoyment of this series, we recommend the Handbook of the World's Great Novels, which you may obtain by sending 25 cents to World's Great Novels, Post Office Box 30, Station J, New York 27, New York. That's Post Office Box 30, Station J, New York 27. The Rise of Silas Lapham is adapted for radio by Jack C. Wilson. The music was composed by Emil Soderstrom, and the orchestra was directed by Bernard Berquist. The entire production was under the direction of Homer Heck. Jess Pugh is featured as Silas Lapham, and Hope Summers as Persis Lapham. Penelope is played by Geraldine Kay, Irene by Martha McCain, and Tom Corey by Harry Elders. Bromfield Corey is played by Sherman Marks. The narration is by Ken Nordine. Mr. Rogers was Ted Liss, Bartley Hubbard was Charles Flynn, and Mr. Seymour was Richard Thorne. This is John Conrad. And this program comes to you from Chicago and is a presentation of the National Broadcasting Company and its affiliated independent stations. This is NBC, the National Broadcasting